On July 3rd, 1988, an American warship stationed in the Strait of Hormuz fired two ground-to-air missiles towards an Iran Air flight carrying 290 passengers. Everybody on board passed away. Nobody was ever prosecuted for this mistake. And the reason it happened, the reason an American warship was there in the first place, starts way before 1988. If you're not familiar with the Strait of Hormuz, good for you, your mental health is better than mine. And if you are, here's a quick refresher. There's a bunch of oil over here, and I'll get into why in just a second. It's really hard to get that oil to the rest of the world, it's just a lot of desert. But what's this? Computer, enhance. It's a strait. What if we put oil on boats and then float boats through that strait? More control of the strait, more oil. More oil, more money. Every day, 20% of the world's oil passes through this narrow strip of water. Over the past 2,000 years, it's been controlled by the Persians, the Arabs, the Portuguese, the British, and the American. But no matter who's in charge, the rules stay the same. Control the strait, control the world. In this video, I'm going to show you the full history of this place. I'm not going to talk about what's happening right now. You can get that anywhere. Instead, I want to show you how the conflict you're currently seeing on the news is actually thousands of years old. Because once you see that, you can't unsee it. And while I talk, I'm painting a scene of daily life in Bandar Abbas, which is a port town that borders the Strait of Hormuz. To understand how we got here, we have to go way back in time. So close your eyes and imagine a life 4,000 years ago. We see Mesopotamian merchants loading boats on the shores of the Persian Gulf, trading copper and timber and tin through this exact stretch of water. The ancient world ran on bronze, and the Strait of Hormuz was its highway. The first empire to really own the Strait of Hormuz was the Achaemenid Empire, which stretched from Egypt to modern-day Pakistan at its peak, and the Gulf was like their private lake. Every shipment was taxed, and it made Persians incredibly wealthy. We actually have the receipts. We have clay tablets recording these taxed transactions that still exist today. That empire fell to a man named Alexander the Great, and after that, different Persian dynasties fought for control of who had the rights to this strait. They even fought with the Romans for the right to tax the silk and the spice trade that was flowing through this passage of water. Now, you can kind of think of this as like the world's most expensive and lucrative toll booth. That's essentially what the Strait of Hormuz was acting as even 2,000 years ago. Then in 630 AD, something remarkable happened. Arab armies, newly united under Islam, banded together and tore through the Sassanid Empire, which was the empire that was controlling the strait at this time. Now, by 650, about 20 years later, this whole region was under Arab control. So that meant new rulers, new religion, a new flag, and essentially new owners of this super expensive toll booth. So it's no coincidence that the Abbasid Caliphate, which came to power in 750 AD and held its capital in Baghdad, reached its golden age while it was controlling this passage of water. And by the 10th century, Gulf merchants were running direct sea routes to Guangzhou, China. So silk, tea, spices, camels, parchment, it all flowed through the Strait of Hormuz, and Arab traders dominated the Indian Ocean for the next 500 years. And then, in 1507, a Portuguese man named Alfonso de Albuquerque, not related to Albuquerque, New Mexico, sailed directly into the Gulf and took control of a small island in the middle of the Strait of Hormuz, an island called Hormuz. It's a tiny, barren, and salt-crusted rock sitting in the middle of the strait. In just a few years, the Portuguese seized control of all the shipping through the strait. So that meant spices from Indonesia and silk from China, horses from Persia, all of it funneled through waters that Albuquerque was now taxing at gunpoint. So Portugal held Hormuz for over a century, and they actually built a fort on the island of Hormuz, and it's beautiful. The ruins are still there, and I really, really hope we don't bomb it because it's such a cool piece of history. But the Portuguese were never really invested in colonizing the land because there wasn't a lot of economic incentive to do so. There was barely even fresh water. Instead, they were interested in the position of that region. And it's the first time that a Western power treated the strait as purely strategic instead of some sort of colonial power. And surprise, surprise, it would not be the last. Now, around this time, say roughly the 16th century, the British had been watching the Portuguese and they wanted in on this business. The English East India Company had been selling English wool to Iranians in exchange for Iranian silk. But every time they made a transaction, every ship, every piece of wool that they would sell, they had to pay a massive tax to the Portuguese, and they were getting sick of it. So they hatched a wicked plan. They knew that the Safavid Persians had the same problem. They wanted the Portuguese gone, but they didn't have a navy capable of dislodging them. Well, the British did have a navy, and they wanted the rights to control the island of Hormuz. So they made a pact in secret. The British helped the Safavid Persians drive the Portuguese out using their navy, and in exchange they became the only European power in the region. Now, over the next 200 years, the Gulf was never Britain's primary moneymaker, but it was a passage to India, and India was Britain's primary moneymaker. And speaking of India, I will actually be in India next week. I'll be painting a whole bunch, I can't wait to go, and I'll be sharing all of my art on my Patreon. So if you want to follow along, the link is down below. You can also support me if you choose. And if you're in India, if I have any subscribers out there, shoot me a message or drop a comment. I'd love to see if we can meet up or maybe paint together. And speaking of painting, I've gotten comments saying that people want me to talk about my paintings more, so I'm going to show you the reference image. And I really wanted to paint this because I wanted to show daily life across Iran. It's so easy to dehumanize entire regions or entire countries just because of some sort of geopolitical conflict. But I love this scene. There's so much like life and community. I'm not sure if Persian people call them aunties, but in India we would call this a circle of aunties sitting around and preparing some kind of food. But I just wanted to share that that's sort of the motivation. And for me, anytime I paint something, I want to feel it. And in this case, I'm just trying to feel the life and the sort of empathy for these people who are living through this horrendous war. And so, I don't know, I just thought it'd be fun to try to paint this. Let's see how it goes. Back to the story. So we had left off around the 16 to 1700s when the British were firmly controlling this region as the only European power in the area. And I want to share a really interesting anecdote. So around this time, the pirates came along. They were actually the Qawasim, which is an Arab seafaring tribe controlling what is now a lot of the UAE. So they had been raiding British ships, and Britain's response was something called the General Maritime Treaty of 1820. And the opening line is incredible. I'll read it for you. It says, "There shall immediately be a cessation of plunder and piracy by land and sea on the part of the Arabs who are parties to this contract forever." The treaty basically said that the sheiks who signed this document would get to retain their land, their sheikdoms as the British called them, and in exchange the British would get unparalleled access to their entire coastline. And get this, that land that those sheiks controlled remained under British protection until 1971, at which point it became known as the United Arab Emirates. Well done, pirates. So Britain never formally colonized the Gulf, and they didn't really need to because they used treaties and naval patrols and carefully placed political agents to do their bidding. By the mid-19th century, the Gulf was in every practical sense just a very expensive English toll booth. Until, in one strike of oil, everything changed. See, for centuries, the whole purpose of controlling the strait was to control trade. So materials like silk and spices and copper and pearl would all have to travel through the strait. But on May 26, 1908, a British man named George Reynolds struck oil in the mountains of southwest Persia. The company that formed around his discovery was the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, which you probably know today as BP. Winston Churchill was so excited about this that he immediately converted the entire British Navy from coal to Persian oil. And I love this quote. He said, "Fortune has brought us a prize from a fairy tale beyond our wildest dreams." But the fairy tale didn't last long. Shortly after, the Americans showed up, and we have a way of kind of ruining things for everybody on the planet Earth. On May 31st, 1932, the Standard Oil of California Company struck oil in Arabia, on the other side of the strait from where the British were. Now, the British were furious. They had spent centuries locking down this region through treaties and trade and guns, and American oil companies had basically just walked in and claimed the biggest prize in history. And to make matters worse, the British actually prospected and surveyed Arabia and decided not to claim that land or do anything there because they thought there was no oil. Embarrassing. Now, the Americans and the British were fighting side by side during World War II, but in the Gulf, they were kind of becoming rivals. And then, on Valentine's Day 1945, President FDR pulled a baller move. He struck a deal with the King of Saudi Arabia, which stated that the U.S. would provide military protection to the kingdom in exchange for its reliable oil supply. It was a deal that has shaped the Middle East ever since, and it marked the end of Britain's control in that region. But American dominance in the Gulf took decades to solidify, and the British didn't actually pull out until 1971. Now, when they did officially pull out, the United States was concerned that they would leave a power vacuum. And so President Richard Nixon in the 1970s came up with a strategy called Operation Two Pillars. And yes, I know how ironic that name is. Essentially, the two pillars was this. They would arm Iran and Saudi Arabia heavily and let them stabilize their regions themselves. Over the 1970s, the United States sold over $11 billion worth of weapons to the Shah of Iran alone. And then, right at the end of the decade, in 1979, both pillars collapsed spectacularly. The Iranian Revolution toppled the Shah, and that same year, religious militants stormed the Grand Mosque in Mecca, nearly seizing Saudi Arabia. The direct consequence of this was America sending warships to the region, including the one that shot down that passenger plane in the Strait of Hormuz. So to recap, Americans found oil, they forced the British out, they gave Iranians and Saudi Arabians a bunch of guns that eventually led to a change in regime, so America stepped in by sending the military to that region, and the strait that Mesopotamian merchants sailed 4,000 years ago became once again the most contested waterway on Earth. But here's the pattern I want you to notice. In 2300 BC, the Sumerians loaded copper onto boats that would pass through the Strait of Hormuz because they had no choice. It was the easiest and the only way to move that much material. The Achaemenid Persians built a navy to tax that same corridor. The Portuguese seized an island in the middle of it, and they held it for a century by force. The British signed treaties to own it, and the American oil companies flew in and quietly bought the rights to everything around it. And now, today, a US president is threatening to bomb the entire region if a country doesn't reopen it. All that to say that flags change, technology changes, the strongman and his justification will change, whether it's God or trade or currency or power, or maybe even the threat of nuclear weapons. But one thing has never changed. Whoever controls the water controls the money. And it makes you wonder, who's going to control it next? This is Painting the Past. Thanks for watching.